Okay, hello everyone. It's 1 p.m, so we'll get started. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Steph Ball and I'm the manager at the Funding Centre. Funding Centre is an online grants portal which includes an online grants database, fundraising resources and application management functionality. It's also an enterprise of our community. I'd like to start off first by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I am on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend this respect to the traditional owners of the lands from which our audience are joining us from today. Please feel free to use the Teams chat to say hello, introduce yourself, and let us know which land you're calling from. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on outcomes with Jen Riley today. When I first saw that Jen was running a similar webinar for grant makers, I thought I'd ask if it were possible if we could flip the script and run a similar one for grant seekers. When we first had that conversation, I couldn't have imagined how popular it would be. We've now fully subscribed 2 sessions with 1,000 registrations each and are considering a 3rd session. It's good to note that with such high levels of interest, although we will be taking questions throughout this presentation, we'll be doing so via a QR code, which will be presented on the slides. It will take you to a Mentimeter page where you can pose your questions and upvote similar ones. The QR code will appear on all of the slides and we'll also send a URL in the chat for those of you who'd prefer to use your computer or laptop. Please be mindful that we are at capacity and so we won't be able to answer every single question, but we will try to answer some of the more common ones that pop up. Questions will be answered at the end of the session. If any of you are having technical issues, please use the Teams chat, not the Mentimeter chat, and we will aim to assist as quickly as possible. It's important to also note that this webinar will be recorded and we'll send the recording to you all along with the slides and common questions and answers in an email next week. Just one final piece of housekeeping. We'll be sending out a survey at the end of today's session. If you have the time, it would be great if you could fill it out as it will help us to tailor future presentations and training to meet your needs. It only takes about 2 minutes. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jen Riley, Chief Impact Officer at Smarty Grants and our community enterprise that a lot of you may have heard of. Jen has more than 20 years experience in the social sector, having worked with government and large not-for-profits of all kinds, and has been part of leading firm Clear Horizon Consulting. She's a specialist in social sector change with skills in strategic planning, program and product design, management and evaluation. Okay, that's all from me. Now the introductions are done. Jen, over to you.
Thank you and welcome everyone. It's great to be online with you. So what we will cover today, we're going to cover over what outcomes are and what an outcomes mindset is. I'm going to turn my camera on, then you can see me. The difference between objectives, outputs and outcomes. And we're going to look at understanding the relationship of a theory of change to outcomes and activities. So as a good starter, I'm going to ask you a question. And that is, why should we, as organisations, measure outcomes? Maybe put your response in the chat. See if we can get a few comments flowing. That why should you bother? It's a lot of work. Well, it's certainly an investment. And, you know, why should you bother doing it? Why should you invest in understanding it and go to the, the work of bringing in somebody or doing it in-house? Why should we measure outcomes? We're doing this in the Teams chat. See if we've got some comments. Fantastic, great. A few comments coming through. So we can be accountable, so we can demonstrate impact to the community, drive the decision-making process. I'm just picking a few of them as we go through here. Accountability is coming up again and again. Understanding impact. Ask for more funding, absolutely, that can be there. Measurement of achievement. Improvement, yep, so this is great. You've certainly got your business case there, haven't you? In terms of why you need to do this. And I've just written a few of the reasons that I've popped up here. Accountable, which came up a lot in the chat. We are stakeholders of community money, and we are here to implement work, and so to know if what we do makes a difference or if we could be doing things better is something really, really important. Assessing the change for the people, the environment, or the other intended beneficiaries. So it's an opportunity to assess the extent to which we're making a difference. Learn, and this is one of my favourites, is to learn what is working well and what we could do better, to keep feeding back as a continuous improvement loop into our program design, because our world is changing, as we know. What worked 5 years ago might not work now. So constantly getting feedback in terms of, are we achieving change? Getting that feedback enables us to adapt our programs and improve our programs. And, funders are asking for it. And some will actually only pay for outcomes. They are moving to a payment for outcomes model. So having the literacy around outcomes and outputs and how to write them as statements and how to report on them is a really important skill set for you and your organisations. And even just having the language so that if you do bring somebody else in to do it for you, at least you know what you're talking about in terms of what those terms mean and what you're looking for. So what are they? What are outcomes? Simply put, they are benefits or changes for the individuals or organisations engaged in a project, program, or initiative. They can be changes in what people do, think, what they know or can do, or what their condition is. So I use this neat little acronym called BACS, B-A-C-K-S, for behaviour, attitude, circumstances / conditions, knowledge or skills. It's worth you jotting that down on a notepad, BACKS, and if nothing else you get out of today, I hope you get a few things out of today, but I hope that you walk away with this acronym BACS, because it's a good way of testing your outcome statement. Does the outcome statement address one of these? Is it a behaviour? Is it an attitude? Is it a change in circumstance, such as employment or housing status? Or is it an increase in their knowledge or skills? Generally, outcomes fit in one of those 5, but there are others, such as awareness or motivation. There are other ways we talk about outcomes, but essentially, that's a really good starting list for you to use as a rule of thumb. So here's an output. We're going to get clear on outputs and outcomes. An output is a car seat. So that's something that's been produced or created by the work of the car seat manufacturers. They might output 5,000 units a year. The outcome, which is what we're interested in, is, we would hope, a safe child and reduced harm in an accident. So you can see here that the outcome is a benefit or a consequence of the output. So the output is what's produced by the organisation, and the outcome is the benefit for the beneficiary. Another example, might closer to home, perhaps your organisation runs financial literacy classes. The output of your organisation might be that you ran 10 literacy classes, or you gave out 20 hours of teaching. But the question is anybody better off? So you would hope that the outcomes are increased knowledge or potentially a reduction in debt. And these outcomes can be measured, evaluated, and reported on. And in fact, we believe they should be, because otherwise, how do we know if our programs or funding is making a difference? But we need both outputs and outcomes. This isn't a downer on outputs. We absolutely need to measure the outputs because that gives us a sense of scale and reach. But we also need the outcomes. Outcomes don't exist without an output, and outputs require an intended purpose, an outcome to work towards. So they're different sides of the same coin, really. So another way to sort of conceptualize this in terms of outputs and outcomes is think of the program that you run, the events, the youth programs, the environmental innovation, the business grants, the community development, the leadership programs. The outputs of those programs are the rock in this picture, just what you deliver. And the ripples are the outcomes. They're what follow as the result of this output. So it could be a change in knowledge of a local service, a change in young person's behaviour, a shift in attitudes towards solar panels, improved health, increased business skills. These are the ripples of our work, often not what we control, but what we have influence over. So an outcomes orientation, it really does require us to start with the intended beneficiary in mind. What are their challenges, their needs, their issues, their constraints, their priorities? What do they want to be doing differently as a result of your intervention? It's opposed to what we do. Often I read lots and lots of grant reports, and the reports are about what we did, number of outputs, number of workshops. It's not about what you do, it's about the change for the person who's the recipient of your program. It's about their experience. And this is about thinking about the what next. So in the coffee barista example here on the right, it's about being obsessed with the client on the other side of the counter. You may do a bunch of activities to produce the coffee, but what matters is there a behaviour, attitude, condition, knowledge or skill happening on the other side of that counter? So for this person here, it could be, did the client get their caffeine hit? Was it a good experience drinking that coffee? To have an outcome orientation is to be obsessed with the client's BACKS backs. So I'm going to get you to test this. What's the output in this example? Maybe write this in the chat. And what is the outcome, or the intended outcome according to the organisation? What is the output? What's being produced by the organisation? And what is the outcome that they're hoping will happen for the beneficiary or the client? Have a go at writing it in the chat. Yes. We could be quite cheeky and say that the output is the Coke, but the outcome could be all sorts of other things, such as tooth decay and addiction to sugary products. Coke in, happiness out, quite like that. Yeah, but you get the idea. And marketers are really good. They don't sell you the product. They sell you the experience or the outcome of the product. So you're all across that. Fantastic. Here's another one. Bit trickier. What's the output and what's the outcome? I'm sort of thinking. So what's being produced by a company or an organisation who's not in this picture, and what's the outcome for the beneficiary? Yeah, Bubbles. Happy child. Yeah, look at that smile. Exactly. I think it's Katie there. Output is, I've lost you. You've moved too quickly up the screen. But basically, the toy is the output. That's what's been produced. It's been given to the child, and then the outcome. You know, they've had to do something with it, but the outcome is that they're happy. There you go. So a couple of examples there about output and outcome. What about attendance? Now, this is a tricky one because this comes up a lot with people. They ask me, is attendance an output or an outcome? Now, you might have a view on that as well. Is that an output or an outcome? What's your thoughts? It sounds like a tricky question. And to be honest, most evaluators will debate this. And it actually came up at a conference a couple of years ago where Michael Quinn Patton, who's like the godfather of evaluation, and he said, look, if you're changing people's behavior and if they're turning up, then it is actually an outcome, because it is the output is produced or delivered by you, the service or the community org. The outcome is the experience of the client, participant, community member. It's very low hanging fruit, like it's a very short term outcome, but getting people to turn up might be and that's their behavior change that they've attended. And if they attend again, as they keep coming back, that's certainly an outcome. But it's not the only thing you'd be looking at. You'd also be looking at how was their experience and did they learn anything or did they make a social connection? But at a very low level outcome, it's because it's about their behavior. You produce the course, they took on a behavior. What about access? Access is a tricky one. So often you read the report, increase access to our service. Is that an output or an outcome? Again, applying our rule, output is produced. So can you produce access? Ask somebody who has problems or challenges entering a building because there's no ramp, like a mum with a pram. If someone's put a ramp in there, that's something you've produced. You've produced access for them. And the outcome is the experience. You can produce access, that's right. You can make it easier for people to take up a service. So it's an experience. You can give somebody a bus to get to a service, but knowing that a service has childcare will have a huge impact on their ability to attend the service. So in this instance, it is an outcome, and I also think it can be an output as well. Something you've delivered, the bus, the ramp, maybe you put captions on your online course. You've created a service, but it can also be an experience of I'm more likely to attend because I know that I can get into the building or I can participate, whereas before I couldn't. So it's an experience. Okay, so how do we go from objectives to outcomes? Now, many of you have had lots of objectives in your plans. And we can turn those into outcome statements. So this was an objective given to me by a program manager. We want to increase access for people from cold backgrounds to attend community events. So the question, and you can do this for your peers or for yourself, is to ask the question, why? Why do you want to increase the number of people involved? To what end? Why do we want to increase that access? What do you expect will be the benefits for the end user or the ultimate beneficiary? These questions will really help you unpack why you want to increase that access. And the response might be something like this, and this was the response that I got when I asked that question. And the program manager said, well, so that more people are connected to each other, they spend money at the event and they generate income for local business and we get a sense of community cohesion. And I'm like, whoa, there's a lot in that statement. Say it again, write it down, and then either put a line under the outcomes or highlight them and say, there are the outcomes. These are the changes that you are hoping to create. People are more connected to each other. 1, income for local businesses. 2, sense of community cohesion. So we pull those out of the statement into 3 outcomes. We're unbarreling, and this is a constant challenge with many organisations, is when you put in an application, you'll often barrel it all together. You need to separate the changes into separate lines so that you can measure them. And then what we do to turn it into an outcome statement is put the word increase or decrease if appropriate. Increase, what are you changing? And then for who? Across the community, for local business, or for a particular cohort. So let's unpack that outcome statement a little bit more. I often write my outcome statements in past tense because it kind of helps me think about what happened. So looking forward in a year's time, what outcomes am I hoping would have happened? And then writing them like that. As I said, it's generally an increase or decrease or reduction, or enhanced is generally a direction at the start of the statement. Then there's the what is actually changing, the BACKS. In this instance, it's behaviour, daily exercise, and then the for who, so for the residents. So that's a good sort of way for you to then look at your outcome statements when you've written them down and sort of reorganize them a bit so that they look a bit like this. And then you'll be on track to ensuring that it is close to, is an outcome statement or close to an outcome statement. But as I said before, outcomes are not all created equally. There's a ripple effect. There's short-term, medium-term, and long-term, you hope. Anyway, you have some short-term benefits, but you hope that there is a flow-on effect of your program. And certainly the more your intervention happens, the more likely those outcomes are to occur. So let me break it down a bit here for us as an example. So a very short-term outcome is attendance. Like we got you here, you attended, hopefully you've all stayed on, and that's a behaviour. So that's a very short-term attendance. Then there's really immediate, we're hoping that you'll improve your knowledge about outcomes measurement. So in the short term, I've sort of put in the lighter blue at the bottom of this table, the sorts of outcomes you can expect at each stage. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's sort of just to give you some ideas of the sorts of things that happen. It's very rare that you'll get behaviour change, in a very, very short term, unless they declare a pandemic and everyone works from home the next day. It's very unusual for an intervention to result in a very quick behaviour change. Normally, there is some sort of change management that goes on. People get brought into awareness, they build some skills, they get some motivation to engage in a behaviour. So in a medium term, so in the next couple of weeks, you may go away and identify outputs and outcomes in your program. So you've adopted a practice. And over the long term, hopefully you start to measure outcomes and learn what is working or not working. So you're starting to see a more sort of changes in policies and embedded behaviour over a longer term and some of the benefits of that. And then over this very, very long term, you start to see perhaps the benefits of that in terms of conditions for social, economic, environmental for your particular projects. Now, of course, long term, can mean 25 years in certain projects. It really depends on your context. It depends how long the project's going for. There are a number of things to consider. But I think it's this point that there are this idea of there's a temporal dimension to outcomes. There is this sort of short, medium, long term to consider. I've conceptualized this another way. Some people like to go left to right with their sort of outcomes. Some people go top to bottom. So here's a way of looking at a healthy living program that's being run in an aged care setting. We would hope through this particular intervention that will improve knowledge of healthy lifestyle. We're hoping that will lead to some daily exercise in residents. Hopefully that reduces the blood pressure, and over time, or we may be contributing to a population level change in reduction in cardiovascular illness. You can see the further you get away from the activity, the less control you have over the outcome. So things like reducing high blood pressure in residents, you have no control about what else is going on in their lives or the stresses or their medication. So you can only sort of have that as a North Star that you're working towards. And this is where the theory of change comes in, which I'm going to talk about later. But having it there as something you're working towards, but understanding that there are many other factors. What you can realistically achieve and have stronger influence over are definitely those short term. So they really, really matter, the short and medium term outcomes. And there needs to be ideally an evidence link between, if we achieve this, then it's likely these things are going to happen. So what's wrong with these outcomes? And these are outcome statements that I've been given. You want to have a go in the chat. Where do we start with giving some feedback to somebody about these? What's wrong with these as statements? Yeah, motherhood statements. They are, they're very general, not particularly specific. Promote, that sounds like something that the organisation's going to do. So it sounds a lot like an objective. It's something they're going to set out to do to others. When you're going to promote something to someone, it doesn't sound like an outcome. Yeah, it's hard to measure. I mean, you got social/economic benefit. I mean, you definitely want to unpack that. So there's a few issues with those, yeah, but I'll definitely say that second one is more an objective. And if you could turn it into an outcome, that the outcome is ongoing or increased lifelong learning for a cohort. The promoting opportunities, what you do to get there, they're the activities or the objective. So great, thank you. Yes, you need to ask, so what? So this also raises this question about who has outcomes, and this is something that comes up again and again when people come to write applications for grants. And you'll often be asked, who are the primary beneficiaries? That is those who are intended to be better off as the result of the program. So it could be children. The secondary beneficiaries are sort of those in the next ring out. They're the ones not directly targeted, but may benefit. And the example we use here is a country sports program may impact the wider community and contribute to a sense of community cohesion. So, for instance, you might fund the local footy club. They might be the direct beneficiaries. They get to play footy, but the secondary beneficiaries is everyone who turns up to watch it on a Sunday afternoon, who are getting to connect with each other. Maybe they're selling some things at the local coffee shop owner. They are the sort of secondary beneficiaries of the project. Now, this next group's really, really important. This is the intermediaries. And these are the people or groups that you work through to achieve your program goals. They may also be better off as the result of the intervention, but they're part of your design, that you deliberately work through those people to achieve outcomes. And a lot of projects take this approach. And I'll give you an example. A classic one is an early literacy program for under fives. What we're trying to do in an early literacy program is often work with the parent and get the parent to change their behaviour so that they share a book with children daily. And the outcome for the primary beneficiary, the child, is improved early literacy skills. Now, arguably, they're both beneficiaries because they both will benefit from, the bonding that takes place through that sort of sharing a book with each other. But you can certainly report on the outcome. Even though your primary beneficiary might be the child, you may need to report on the intermediary and the outcome for the intermediary. I'll give you another example. We often, in health projects, they work with GPs and bring GPs awareness up on a particular issue. So it could be, LGBTQI plus health, or it might be eating disorder. So by working with the GP, your end user, your beneficiary, is improving outcomes for a particular cohort or group with a particular condition, but your outcomes may be limited. You might only be able to talk about change in behaviour about the GPs or your intermediary. So there's many, many examples where they may be different. Your end user, you may not even report outcomes for the end user. You may be reporting the outcomes for the intermediary. So who has the outcomes? As I've just sort of said, you've got these secondary, primary, intermediaries, but they happen, the individual can certainly have them. And policymakers, we talk about system actors. They may have a change in behaviour or a change of attitude. Funders, you might lobby funders. Groups, tenancy groups, so on, schools or organisations or population level groups, so the citizens of Greater Dandenong. You can certainly have outcomes at very different levels. And I think depending on your theory of change, how you believe change happens, is it through a white coat? Is it through, a respected peer? It depends on your design of your program, but identifying clearly whose behaviour is changing or knowledge, BACKS, the backs, what's changing and for who, and being able to tell that story is really, really important. And I'm going to take you through theory of change very quickly, and that'll help you identify the causal chain. So quickly here, we're going to talk, I'm just going to just step on this issue of population versus program. Population level outcomes are, such example is the mental health of the City of Greater Dandenong. No one program can be held responsible, no one organisation can be held responsible for the outcomes of a huge cohort like that. It's simply too challenging. It takes a village, it takes multiple actors. Often they're the goal of a collective impact project where many are working together. But it's also good to have that as a statement so you know what you're working towards. It's a North Star. You're not accountable for it, but you can certainly say, we're working towards this. We're working with a cohort that makes up the bigger group. So we're working with 25 participants engaged in the training course, and they might be between an age group. So it's good to sort of say we've got population level outcomes that you're not accountable for, and program level outcomes, which you should try and be accountable for. So how do we come up with them? And this is a really good question, is, where do we start? And often you'll have objectives, you'll have a strategic statement, a strategic plan. And as part of that process, and increasingly we are seeing this, that there is a concurrent process where you work out outcome statements when you're doing a strategic plan. So you're saying we want to see these changes in our beneficiaries. We want to see this happen, or we want to see these changes in, if you're advocating for change, you want to see changes in policymakers. It's about writing down and being very clear about the change that you're trying to create. Often you can start with current state. Where are we now? And then where do you want to be in the future? That's another way to do this. We develop a theory of change as evaluators, and that helps us work out short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. They're often called logic models, or the results chains. The different words for basically a drawing that shows with little boxes how one thing hopefully leads to another. And look, there are change theories that are well documented. So things like the bandwagon effect, where one person starts doing something and then another, and then everyone jumps on board. Apparently there's a thing around tattoos at the moment. Or diffusion theory, where, the early adopters get an iPhone and then the late majority come later on. Social modeling, somebody that we all respect and like in our peer group starts behaving in a certain way or eating a particular food, that's another well-documented theory of change. But we can also have our own sort of theories, or a mixture of theories that are applicable for our local cohort and how change happens in our community. So I'm going to walk you through very, very quickly. This is not a theory of change training session, but I just want to help you be able to connect what a theory of change is and how it connects to outcomes. So, current state, children have poor health in a particular community. Future state, improved health for children. We come up with an idea. We'll provide free apples to children at school. That's our intervention. Another one might be provide access to housing support services so that people have a home and they feel safe and secure in it. So this is sort of the intervention, and this is the long-term outcome. And often we're very good at articulating this, but there's sort of a big hole in the middle, and we need to unpack what the bit in the middle is. We often call that a miracle leap, like, you know, you provide access to housing support services and then all of a sudden people are going to be, you know, have a home. There's a bit more that needs to happen between point A and point B. And I quite like this little cartoon, you know, this sort of idea that something magical happens in the middle. So we need to be more explicit in step 2. So that's what I'm going to ask you to have a go at doing today. As I'm going to get you to write down, hopefully you've got a pad in front of you with a bit of paper, and I'd like you to have a go at filling out these boxes. So on a bit of paper in front of you, this is my drawing. Do 4 little boxes with your pen. Give out apples is in the first box. I'll give you a minute or 2 to do it, but I find it's a lot easier for you to test this than for me to be talking at you. Have a go at writing them down. Give out apples, and then you've got 2 blank boxes, and then have a go at filling out these blank boxes. What happens after you give out the apples? What do we think? Don't overthink it. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to give out a bunch of apples to kids. What do you think is going to happen? And then what's going to happen after that that's going to lead to improved health? There's probably 5 or 6 things that might happen, but let's just put in 2. So there's probably a few things that go on here, but the intervention is you've turned up at the school, a couple of boxes of apples, you've given them out. We're starting to get some results here. This is great. Yeah, you really hope that the kids eat them. That's step 1, right? They actually, you know, they don't use it for cricket practice. And then what happens after they've eaten them? Maybe they don't go and eat junk food. I think that's what somebody suggested there. Or they want to go, oh, that's actually quite nice. I wouldn't mind trying some other fruit. So they eat more fresh fruit. So there's a couple of things that can happen. So I think we're all on the same page that we really hope that what happens is they eat them. And then I've put in here that that we have improved levels of Vit C. And then that leads to improved health. Now there's a bunch of other things that could happen. Go plant some apple trees. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? But there's some assumptions. And this is the other thing about theories of change, is that what is unique about theories of change is you document your assumptions. So they don't throw away the apple. That the fruit is fresh and has high levels of Vit C. Also assuming that they have a deficit in Vit C, but there's a lot more we can go with here. So the point of this exercise, though, is to show you that there is an activity, an intervention done by you. There is an output as the result of that activity. And then there is a short-term outcome, a medium-term outcome, and a long-term outcome. And there are some measures that you can put against each of those outcomes. And the output is the number of apples that you have given out. The outcome is what happens with the young person. They consume the apple. Their levels of Vit C go up. They have improved health. It's a very, very simplified version, and it comes from a fantastic book called Purposeful Program Theory by Funnell and Rogers. Excellent book. So I have borrowed that example straight out of there. So we will be sharing these slides, but it's a really great activity to do with other people. I like that one, Jamila. That's a good one. Give out apples, kids eat apples, kids eat other fruits more regularly, improved health. Love that. So when you're applying for grants, I think they want to know what outcomes let me say that again. They want to know what outcomes their investments are contributing to. That's what grant makers want. That's what they want to know. Grantors want you to report on what you do, that they're still interested in your activities and your outputs, but they also want to hear about the changes that you are helping to create for your beneficiaries. So beyond you, to that next level, to what's happening across the counter. You will be required to outline your intended outcomes in your applications. And we're seeing a lot more of this. Like, what do you intend your outcomes to be? Many acknowledge that outcomes might change over time, and they do because things change, but certainly have that idea of an intended outcome. You intend to increase consumption of apples. You intend to increase the health and well-being of your population. You intend for greater social connection amongst people. So I'm going to give you a little bit of info about Smarty Grants, which is the software that we work on. But this will be applicable to other granting softwares as well, because increasingly they are having outcome questions inbuilt into the systems. So you're going to find pretty much every application you're going to start going for are going to start asking these questions. In fact, many have done for a long time. So what is the outcome engine? The outcome engine is specific to Smarty Grants, the software that I work for. And what the outcome engine is basically a series of standard questions that funders can add to their application forms. And I'm going to share with you what those standard questions are. It also gives grant makers the option to upload an outcome framework, which is basically a list of their outcomes and their measures into the system. So you need to be ready. This is what I'm hoping you'll get out of this, is you need to be ready to fill out outcome questions in grant applications and not the day before your application's due. So let's get on the front foot. So this is a standard section that you might come across in a grant application. This is the default that we suggest grant makers use in their application forms. So at the top here, we've got a little bit of information about what an outcome is and what they might be, which is pretty much what I've just covered with you. And then you might see a series of questions here. Now, your outcome, we really thought this was important because we thought we want to hear from the organisations on the ground what their outcomes are. So you get to say first what you're hoping to achieve. You know what outcomes are important to your beneficiaries. So the first box here, you get to say what your grant seeker outcome is. Now, here we've got the short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, and long-term outcomes. This is what you put in this box. So this was the grant seeker outcome box. You don't put the activities in this box. You put these 3 things that we worked out when we were doing the activity on paper. Well, that's where you put them, in this box here. So it could be increased positive parenting skills. Now, what we then have in our application is there'll be a drop-down menu. You get to select the outcome from that drop-down menu. Now, the grant maker will select these and upload these into the system. They will specify their outcomes. So here, it might be increased positive parenting skills. You can either select happy families, healthy children. You could pick any of those really. And then you can say, positive parenting skills is shown to improve family dynamics. So if you picked happy families, you could then put a justification in. So what we're advising people to do is, sure, have your outcomes, but provide a list and allow your applicants to select which ones they align with, rather than mandate outcomes. And look, some grant makers might decide to do that, but we are suggesting that they give you a list and that you then select which best aligns with you and your program and your particular circumstances. But this is an example of how this could be filled in. And there's the opportunity to add more. This is a really important point because it takes effort and time to go around measuring that positive parenting. I strongly recommend that you put 10% of your budget for monitoring and evaluation. It is standard practice in international development agencies where I started my career, so the Oxfam, World Vision, CARE, any of those will all have 10% of their grant applications will ask for monitoring and evaluation. DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, they have it as a standard when they give out money. World Bank, United Nations. Increasingly, we're seeing the adoption in domestic government agencies, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get. So I'm saying this to the grant makers, that if they want you to do the work to collect data on outcomes and report on outcomes, they need to fund you to do that. It's not something you can do on the side of your desk when you're already flat out busy and dealing with community in crisis. I recommend you put 10% of the overall budget goes towards monitoring and evaluation. It is proportionate, and I think I think I just got kicked off. I'm back again. So I was saying about the 10% budget, so please put that into your budget lines. Okay, so yes, I froze. Explain what outcomes are. This is what I hope you can explain what outcomes are and what an outcomes orientation is, that you can differentiate between an objective, that is what you want to do, outputs, what you produce, and outcomes, what the benefit to your users are. You understand the relationship of a theory of change to outcomes and activities and how they can be used to harvest, basically, outcomes and activities. And I've also given you some understanding about how the outcome section is set up in the outcomes engine of Smarty Grants. So a bit of a whirlwind, a lot of information there. I really hope you found something useful in all of that. I'm very happy to answer questions. We've got about 13 minutes or so. So back to you, Steph.
Oh, thanks, Jen. That was great. That was so informative. We've got a few questions that have come through on the Mentimeter. Everyone, if you do want to ask a question or if you want to upvote someone else's, just see the pinned chat in the chat about how to access it. There's a URL and a QR code you can scan. So we've got someone who's asked, Jen, do you think it's important to be selective in what you choose to measure or set as an outcome? Can and should everything be measured? How much measurement or weight can communities bear?
Absolutely. This is it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is the response here. I think, no, you need to be particularly selective. And I think, think about the dashboard in the car, right? I build dashboards for people, not car dashboards, but data visualization dashboards. And, I'm like, you get 5 things on your dashboard, not 20, not 11. So pick the most important. When you're driving down the road in a car, it's very handy to know how much petrol you've got left. That needs to go on your dashboard. What are the indicators that are going to tell you whether or not your program is in trouble or your program is on course? Pick those indicators. You don't have to put the weather outside. Yeah, it's nice to know, but you've only got so much bandwidth as an organization. Your primary job is there to deliver, your service and work with your community. Use 10%, use this rule of 10% to sort of think about investment, resources, time, 10% of the measures, just use that sort of 10% as a guide. Yeah, do not measure everything. Try and find the most sensitive measures, so the ones that show change over time. Don't set your measures too far out, like, we're going to change everyone's mental health when we've all been through a pandemic. Maybe just pick something a little bit more sensitive, such as, we're going to get people to call a friend once a week. Pick sensitive indicators and also those that will tell you something like, are you going to run out of petrol? Are you going to be in trouble? I hope that helps.
Great. So we've got someone else who's asked, given the short funding horizons of many projects, it is often necessary in final reports to forecast outcomes, for example, by means of a survey of intent among participants. What are the pitfalls of this?
Sorry, Steph, say that again.
So given the short funding horizons of many projects, it's
most are only sort of 12 months or so.
Yeah, it's often necessary in final reports to forecast outcomes. They're saying, for example, by means of a survey of intent among participants. They're asking what the pitfalls of this are.
Yeah, I mean, intention's difficult, right? The best, we all have intentions. I have intentions to go to the gym every day, but what I actually do is very different. So, I'm not a big fan of intentions. I think you're better off sort of measuring, as I said, some more other sensitive measures, such as, or maybe measuring a couple of things. So if it is awareness, knowledge, skills that may contribute to change of behavior, if they've got those things, then they're more likely to take up the behavior. I think intention is a little bit tricky. I think you're better off just trying to work out what are the preconditions, so whatever you're hoping they're going to do, what needs to be in place for them to do that. So if they are going to improve their financial literacy and they're going to reduce their debt, what are the things that need to be in place, and then try and measure those. Measure what you've achieved in your 12 months. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
Great question.
Yeah. Given, someone's asked, given many outcomes happen after the term of funding, what's reasonable for funders to ask about? Only immediate and short-term outcomes, as an example, is that worthy of 10% of the grantee's budget?
I have a sneaky thing here, because this actually comes up a lot, is how far does funding go? And I say this to grantors as well. I'm like, if you're only going to spend $5,000 on something, it is not reasonable that you get people are going to sort of change their health and well-being. You've got to more think about the short-term stuff, such as, are you going to increase participation? Are you going to increase accessibility, affordability, awareness and knowledge? Like, that's more likely the outcomes you're going to achieve for a small grant. Be realistic about what can be achieved. As long as the North Star, you're hoping these things, it will lead to these things, and there's a plausible theory of change that if we do this, then it will lead to this. But you can only report on the benefits and changes that take place within that time period you're funded for. If they want to fund you for 2 years, then if they want to know what happens in 2 years' time, they've kind of got to fund you for those 2 years. Or they've certainly, if they want you to do follow-up, you negotiate in for you to follow that up. Because glass balls are kind of tricky when it comes to evaluation. You need something concrete. That sort of answer that question.
Yeah, I think so. This one's interesting. They're asking, what if the grant provider's default list of outcomes is poorly conceived?
There's a chance. I hope to have some input into the ones that go through Smarty Grants, but you're right, they can put up what they want there. It's really tricky. You could certainly try and start a dialogue with the funder and say, I wonder if we could look at these sorts of outcomes, or in our experience, these are the sorts of outcomes. Maybe start a conversation with the funder, and because the funders do really respect organisations that are on the front line. They know you have a unique perspective. They know you have lived experience, practice wisdom, and many of you are trained in your areas of expertise. So you bring a lot. And I think you need to hold that power. I know it's a power dynamic, grantees and grant makers, but hold your power. You are experts. And I think give some of that feedback about these could be some of the things. Okay, but anyway, it's Thursday night and the application's due tomorrow. I think it's really tricky if you haven't had the chance to have that conversation. I think you've kind of got to make the most of what's there on the form. Hopefully there's an opportunity to explain, like they might have an outcome that's a bit weak, and you could potentially put yours in and then sort of, build on what they've put. But you kind of got what you've got, and then hopefully you win the grant and you can go on a bit of a journey with the funder and sort of report more. Don't lower your standard just because they haven't worked out what an outcome is. be leaders, be bold.
Someone's asked about the slides. I just wanted to remind everyone we will be sending a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar out next week. Another question, someone has said, Jen, we're applying for a small grant to deliver a men's mental health workshop. We live in a small rural town and are not health professionals, so not sure how we can measure outcomes from this.
My question to you is, what's going to happen? What do you hope is going to happen? What do you hope are the changes? So go back to the backs. What behaviour do you hope these men are going to take up as a result of this mental health? Is it they will exercise more or talk more to their buddies or look up a resource or take themselves off to the GP? What behaviour? What attitudes? Attitudes are very hard to shift, by the way. That's one of the hardest outcome to change, but attitudes and values. But you can, sort of, they might have an attitude that men don't talk about their problems. You might shift that. Condition, whether or not they're sleeping too much or overeating or have an alcohol and drug addiction, like you're probably not going to solve that with a small grant, but look at the knowledge and skills as well. Like through that process, you're running a workshop, you're probably going to give them some skills, you're probably going to give them some knowledge. Maybe just set 2 or 3 things that you hope will happen. I wouldn't overcook it. I'd pick 2 or 3 things that you hope will be the benefits, and then check in with them afterwards and say, did you learn anything? Did you start doing anything differently? And sort of get some data back from them. It could be that simple. Whether you can aggregate that out to other programs, and say, it worked for us, that gets a bit more complicated. But I think setting your intentions and then finding out if they were achieved, and if not, why not, is a really valuable thing.
Great. We might have time for one final question. Jen, this person's asked, they've said they struggle with measuring their outcomes. They constantly fall back on surveys for this. Do you have any practical measurement tools that organisations can use for measuring outcomes?
The Centre for Social Impact have just released something called Amplify, which gives you tools to measure social outcomes. So we'll actually give you validated surveys and questions to measure outcomes. So I know that's an excellent resource that's just recently come out. So it's the Centre for Social Impact. Amplify is the name of the project. There are a lot of sort of common frameworks. So depending on your area, so if you're into children and youth, I recommend you go and look at the Children and Youth Outcomes Framework that was developed by the NEST, N-E-S-T. The NEST has an outcome framework, or you might be interested in homelessness, and there's a shared homelessness framework available for outcomes. There's environmental ones. There's, depending on your area, if you're into arts, there's one called the Cultural Development Network. I've got the name of their thing, but it's the Cultural Development Network have an outcome framework for the arts, and they have a bunch of questions. There's another one called the Community Services Outcome Tree, and they're all actually on a help page, and I can give you that help page. They're on our website. So there are some common frameworks with lists of outcomes in them, and you can just borrow those. It's better to use existing frameworks because they've often validated and researched the outcomes and the questions to go with them. Oh, thank you, Viv. Yes, that's the Community Services Outcomes Tree. So there are existing frameworks and questions out there. But the thing is, it's each program is often quite unique. But yeah, if you can use an existing tool, it's a good idea. It's almost 2 o'clock.
Yeah, I think we might need to wrap it up there, Jen. We've had some great questions. Thanks everyone who attended and got involved in the Q&A and in the chat, in the Teams chat. We will be sending the recording of this webinar out to everyone next week, so just keep an eye on your inbox. We'll also be sending a copy of the slides. As mentioned in the intro, there'll be a survey that you'll all be getting in the next few minutes. It only takes about 2 minutes to to fill out, and it will really help us. We've had a lot of interest in this topic from grant seekers and grant makers and everyone. So we'd love to sort of try and create some tailored resources to help you more on this. So the survey will really help us with that. So thanks to everyone who turned up today. It was really great to see all of the interesting questions. If there were any unanswered questions, we will go through and send you some answers to those in the email next week as well. Jen, thank you so much for delivering this webinar. And on behalf of the community team, thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.